Welcome everyone to episode 10 of The Power of You, and we are here in Bill's home in front of a cozy fireplace. So thank you so much for having us again, Bill.
Oh, thanks so much for coming. And thank all of you for coming too. Welcome to my home.
He's welcoming us in on this winter's day. So as you know, I always have almost like a word or something that comes to me for our episodes. And today the word that is or the topic really is around the word uncertainty. And obviously in the world at large, but also like individually, I believe that uncertainty is something as humans we struggle with quite a lot, and it can, because we are so uncomfortable in uncertainty, it can cause us all these feelings or like negative emotions. Like people can feel really distraught, upset, frustrated. And I wanted to talk today a little bit about embracing uncertainty and the benefits that that could bring. And you know, people might even just be listening to this being like, how can I possibly do that? So I think maybe to start off the conversation, when you think of uncertainty, what do you see, with, how do you see that affect people in your day-to-day and in your line of work?
Well, the natural reaction is fear. And what we're afraid of is negative surprises. Of course, we all love positive surprises, but they don't happen as often as negative surprises. Mm-hmm. You know, most of what we do is by trial and error, so there are lots of negative surprises when we make an error. Mm-hmm. So the brain has a prediction engine. Mm-hmm. There's a British neuroscientist who's quite popular nowadays, Carl Friston, and he's expounded more on that theory than anyone else, but there's many neuroscientists who agree that the brain is constantly making predictions in order to minimize uncertainty and negative surprises in the future. And in fact, part of the problem of our behavior patterns is that we aren't pausing before we take action. When we get a prediction, we act on it as if, okay, this is, I predict that this is going to be a bad scene, so I'm going to take the offensive. But it would be better if we were watching our minds and filtering those predictions, which are intended positively, by nature. Nature has built this in to help us deal with uncertainty. So my friend Jerry Zaltman, Harvard Business School instructor and neuroscientist, he's writing a new book. It's actually almost done. And one of the main themes is embracing uncertainty, embracing ambiguity, and ignorance even, to know what you don't know, and not to get upset about it. Now, this also relates to a subject we've talked about many times of attachment. Because the fear that's created by uncertainty is because we're attached to certain things, like our lifestyles, like making ends meet, like staying in a nice house rather than having to downsize, like having a job you like rather than getting fired, and all of those things. Now that's where real character strength comes in. We all have a reservoir within ourselves we can draw upon, which is, to put it in a single word, courage. And if we get in touch with our own courage, we can overcome the fear of anything, including death. We can become more accepting. So thousands of years ago, this was known and discussed, for example, by the ancient Greeks, who came up with, now it means a different thing in English. Their word was apatheia. It sounds like it means apathy, but what it really means is stoicism. Control the things you can control and accept the fact that the other things are there. And don't make it worse by wallowing in the negativity that you're wallowing in. because you can't change the fact that your teacher hates you. To accept it as a fact of life,
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah, so really, like, the uncertainty, it's our brains are constantly predicting. And rather than default predicting the good outcomes, it's often predicting negative outcomes. And with that, you know, the reason that we have such a kind of negative emotional response to that is because we're actually attached. So it's the fear of losing a certain thing. So it's like you say, the fear of having to downsize your house, the fear of losing your job, the fear of, I don't know, leaving a relationship. It's actually basically what our mind is doing is predicting what you don't want to happen. And this is something I know we've spoken about before. It's a default setting, I think, for many of us. However, I know, because I've seen it, like that voice can be reprogrammed, right? To not be the default. So the default is like, well, what happens if something positive happens? What happens if this is the best decision you've ever made? What happens if everything goes right? And I think that is something that takes a lot of time and a lot of work. And I don't think anybody's perfect. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm perfect and it always works. But I know through time and effort that it can be done. Like, we can work on that inner voice and that inner narrative to change the default positioning. And some people say, oh, you're just being optimistic, Natalie, right? And it's like, I'm more of a realist. And I guess it links into like, well, what is your reality, essentially? So for me, like, optimism is a default because that is my reality, right? Whereas other people say, oh, I'm more of a realist. And I guess that is an invitation to people to think about the reality that they're currently, you know, seeing and living in.
Also, we're very, I hesitate to say controlled by, but it's almost like that. The media, you know, how many hours a day do we spend with the media? It's more than we spend sleeping.
Yeah.
For most people. And now there are 2-year-olds who know how to use smartphones and swipe and so on and so forth. So these new generations are addicted from the beginning, and they're to some extent controlled. So breaking out of that, now there is a balance between optimism and pessimism. The problem with pessimism is both optimism and pessimism are self-fulfilling prophecies. So the more you're pessimistic, the more you're going to be bringing about, you're kind of leaning into that outcome. But the best way I find to balance it is, let's say I'm going to sleep at night, kiss my wife good night, kiss the cat good night. Now we're all got our eyes closed, and now I can think about tomorrow. So I think about tomorrow, and you know, what am I hoping to achieve tomorrow? What could go wrong? What do I do if this happens? What do I do if that happens? Well, if that happens, I'll say, blah, blah, blah. Oh no, you can't say that. So then I'll be all secure that all of the bad things that could have happened tomorrow, if they do happen, I'm at least prepared. And now I can pre-dream the one I want to happen tomorrow. So I can have an intense visualization of what I want it to be. And now I've programmed all of my cells, the 80 billion neurons in my brain and everything else, and all of the invisible parts of me, consciousness, my connections to the whole universe. Everything's ready for me to pull off this big success. But whatever happens, it will be fun. And it'll be fun partially because there'll be surprises. And some of the surprises might be challenging, but I could rise to the challenges. So it's like a game. Like, bring it on. And, you know, I've already accepted the worst that could happen. You know, I won't make this sale. I'll lose this client. Okay, so I'll deal with it. There's these other clients I've been thinking about approaching. I'm too busy to do that, but if I lose a client, then I'll talk to them. I know what I'm going to do if these things happen. So I've done all the work I can possibly do. Now all I can do is I can either choose to just worry, and I know that that isn't constructive.
Yeah.
It's very self-destructive. Or I can go to sleep, and that's usually when I fall asleep.
Well, I think what you're sharing there actually is you know, at the end of the day, it's not only self-reflection, right? But you're being intentional. And I think you're being intentional not just with how you're spending your time and how you're reflecting, but you're also being intentional in like, well, how am I going to spend tomorrow, right? You've already done that work or doing that work as you fall asleep, and you're intentional almost about programming your brain around what you actually want to dream about, right? So it, like with that, again, it's the self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think with intention, like you say, worry doesn't do anything. Like I think it's important to feel it and register it, because there's a difference between, you know, just being ignorant and saying I don't want to deal with that and I don't want to look at it, and actually like registering it, accepting it, and then choosing to do something about it. And I know for me, there's certain things that people just don't want to look at. Like I know for me in the business, like certain things I'm like, oh, I don't want to look there. I don't want to look there. I'm not worrying about it. So, but actually that's very different than accepting, registering, okay, that is something I'm worried about. Okay, but what can I do? What actions can I take? And I think what you're sharing is like, you've got into this practice now of doing this every single night, and it builds a habit. And I think for anything to change, it is about building habits, and things will go wrong. There will be surprises, as you said, right? But it's by building habits, you can deal with any surprises. And I always talk about like micro habits, and you can't underestimate the power of like micro habits, both good and bad, right? So if you wake up in the morning and start by scrolling your phone, that has like a negative impact on your day. If you get up and like go for a walk or go to the gym, that will have a knock-on impact. And so when I think about, you know, the habits that you build, I almost think about it being like train tracks, right? So the habits that we lay down, these micro habits, are almost like building the tracks. So even if something does run across the track and you're not expecting it, like you've built a solid foundation, and yeah, you might wobble, but you'll come back because you have built that. And it sounds like, you know, for you, it is the reflection in the evening, like that does it for you. And I think, you know, for me, just even reflecting, it is things like going to the gym. It is things like going out for a walk, eating healthily, like things like that. It's so simple, but it really makes a huge impact.
You know, you're so right, and it's 24/7. It isn't just when I go to sleep. That's an important part of my day. It's like a control point. Mm-hmm. Getting up in the morning is another control point. Like if I get up and, gee, this old body feels tired, and I wish I was young again, and blah blah blah. That I don't get out of bed if I have that thought until I laugh at it, and I see the humor in it, and. But every moment counts. So we're constantly getting these predictions. And so currently in the United States of America, these predictions, I have no doubt of this, although I'm making a projection to everyone who's an American, that this is a tough time for us. Mm-hmm. And anything could happen. Mm-hmm. And anything includes a lot of bad things. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it kind of makes us even more grateful for what we had a moment ago before it all went bad. Mm-hmm. And also maybe we can get it back to be better than it ever was by learning from this object lesson that God must figure we need. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, but in each moment, the mind is throwing up, nowadays, a negative impulse. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not an impulse to action externally, but it's an impulse to feel bad internally in one way or another. Somebody says a word out of line, it seems political to us, we take it the wrong way. But if we're watching our mind at all times, we can ask ourselves, wait a second, is this my robot? Do I want to just continue feeding the robot? Or what if I do leave my comfort zone and think about change? Think about positive change. What positive change do I actually have the power to achieve? I can't just wipe it away and say I have no power to change myself. Just in each moment, just let that impulse flow through and then kind of float downstream. And feel yourself getting more neutral again. Get into the ability to feel the self-neutralizing capability that we have to, hey, I was about to get mad. 10 seconds later, it's not such a strong impulse. I don't have to do that. I can look at, why did it make me mad? Oh, it's a knee-jerk reaction. I have a knee-jerk reaction. Great. Do I want to have a knee-jerk reaction?
Well, I think that's it. What you shared there is like uncertainty is very linked to change, right? It's linked to change, and I think our fear of it, right? It's we get used to something being in a certain way, and then it changes, and it like blows our mind. We're like, oh my God, I can't deal with this. Like, things are changing, and I wrote about this recently, actually, and just like life and death, like change is one thing that is certain in this life. Like, we as humans are changing constantly. So like, even me and you sitting here right now, we're not the same version of ourselves that we were the last time we sat here, right? Because we have changed. So therefore, this dynamic, we are different people. So this has changed, right? And then, the seasons have changed. Like, you're never the same. You change, and maybe we don't realize it because, I talk a little bit about this. It's a bit like going on a health kick. Like, you don't see the change that's happening every single day because you're looking in the mirror every single day. But, for somebody that perhaps hasn't seen you in a year or 2 years, they notice the change in you because we're always growing, we're always evolving. And so change really is one of life's certainties. And it's interesting that we uncertainty is what we link with change, whereas it actually is one of life's certainties.
Yeah, it makes us insecure, the fact that it's changing. It means we have to catch up and pay attention, and more demands. And life was already complex enough, wasn't it? And now there's more to deal with. We're a bit overwhelmed by the amount of information that our brains are trying to process. Like, let's say that you're a person who likes to be introspective, and you like having some time alone whenever you can be alone to just ponder how your life is going and just let your mind float and see what you're thinking about, and your mind goes to certain things and you wonder why you're thinking about those, and it's interesting. So if you're that kind of a person, then maybe once every other day, being optimistic, you'll actually have time to contemplate like that, at that level. Actually, for most of us, it probably never happens. But let's say you're somebody more like us, and it does happen. So what's actually going to happen? Well, if it happens every 2 days, you've got all of these microseconds that took place from the last contemplation to this contemplation. And everything that happened in that 48-hour period, thousands of things happened. And hundreds of them caught your attention and gave you a P300 wave, meaning surprise. That's the fingerprint in the brain of surprise. And so you might have thousands of those P300 waves a day. If you go back to the 1400s, where, in our previous incarnations, we might have been, a shepherd in a field. and we're taking care of the sheep all day, and we have very few conversations.
Yeah.
But at night, maybe we have a pub we go to, and we have some conversations. Mm-hmm. And we talk about things that happen, but things that create a P300 wave, things that are surprising to us, back in the 1400s weren't happening that often. Yeah. Even when you have a conversation, they're mostly saying the same things you expect them to say. Mm-hmm. They're talking about sports or politics or women or men, mm-hmm. or, very predictable subjects. Yeah. So back then we might have had only hundreds of P300 waves a day. Mm-hmm. Now I estimate it's 40,000. Wow.
Yeah.
So in 2 days, there's 80,000 things to think about, and now we have an introspection period to catch up. And we're the ones who are doing the best job on catching up on these potential introspections. Mm-hmm. Most people don't get around to it. Mm-hmm. And then there's this scientist at Dartmouth who was telling me yesterday that there's actually a brain type. There's people, a very large part of the population, maybe more than half, mm-hmm. who are resistant to pondering or evaluating. She called it anti-evaluation, the anti-evaluation syndrome. They just avoid evaluating things. Mm-hmm. It's much easier. It's just overwhelming. There's too many things to evaluate. So therefore, you just go with your habitual evaluation of that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So maybe this is, you've never seen this orange shirt before, but you've never liked orange shirts. So just, yeah. And you don't have to evaluate it. And then, if you did be willing to evaluate, you might notice it's quite attractive, mm-hmm. and it might look good on you and so on. But we hop right past those opportunities to change because, not that we're scared of them particularly, there's just too many of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so really it's the society that we're living in today, plays a huge part in it. The fact that our brains are constantly being surprised, and it's almost like a coping mechanism, right? So it's not always fear related that we haven't kind of done that reflection and taken a step back and been thinking, oh, what can I learn, and be introspective. It's not always fear. It's just almost like a way to cope because it's almost too much. It's too much. It feels too overwhelming for us to deal with, and I think that's the thing right now with the way the world is. We're so, I think as a human race, people are so focused on and maybe this sounds stupid, but survival, right? People are so focused on okay, well, what do I need to do just to pay my bills? What do I need to do to keep the heating on? What do I need to do to keep food on the table? We're so focused right now, I think, as a human race on meeting our basic human needs, that almost doing any of this introspective work feels like, oh my God, I've got a million other things that I need to do before I can do that. Because again, it goes back to the Maslow hierarchy of needs. How can you, thrive and self-actualize if you can't, heat your house or eat or, So I think that's a huge thing. It's not necessarily that we're scared, but we're just so overwhelmed at the moment trying to meet our basic needs.
It's true. And there's no getting around it that the quality of life hasn't been improving for the last 20 or so years, mm-hmm. the way it had been for a lot of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. We got used to the fact that growth, economic growth, mm-hmm. and plenty, and everybody was going to be fine, and the future was going to be better than the past. Mm-hmm. In the last 20 or so years, not only in the U.S. and Europe, but everywhere, mm-hmm. The growth has slowed and stopped, and the population is aging, and education has failed. Part of it was that education never got to doing this kind of work we're talking about. Mm-hmm. This should have been in schools. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now we need it desperately in schools and in preschool. Mm-hmm. At any rate, you got to take care of certain basics before you can go beyond that. But if at the same time you're not building your courage and your strength of character and your ability to control your own destiny by finding parts of yourself that you're not leveraging yet. That will give you more power to make more money. You'll get more creative ideas about what to do or what not to do, and you'll get better at this very challenging treadmill that we're on. Not necessarily people in every case, like people who are somewhat into knowledge workers, so to speak. Knowledge workers have survived better than anybody else. And it's people who aren't knowledge workers who are getting worried about immigration and robotics and AI, because the kind of work that they do might be replaceable in the future, or maybe already is. So they're really worried. And so ultimately we all have to become some kind of knowledge worker. Well, how the hell do you change if you're 70 years old and it's now I've got to become a knowledge worker? Well, keep an open mind and do some internet searches and see what that would entail. There might be something there that you would really love. Like maybe you've always loved backgammon and you were a terrific player of backgammon. Well, become a backgammon teacher. I just came in, but there are things within us that are positive that we're not using.
Yeah, I think that's it. It kind of links into like investing in yourself, and I don't mean monetary wise. It means time, right? It can be time, it can be resources, it can be anything. And I think that's, again, we start this talking about uncertainty, but like one thing that is certain is uncertainty. But another thing is like by investing in yourself and working on yourself, like that is something that cannot be taken away, right? So no matter what happens in the outside world, if we continue to like work on ourselves, and what does that mean, work on yourself? I mean, build your skills, build your knowledge, like build your experiences. Those are things that cannot be taken away from you no matter what, because they're within, right? So, every job serves a purpose. Every experience serves a purpose. Every person that you meet, whether it be fleeting or a longer kind of connection, like they all serve a purpose. And I think being able to like reflect on those experiences will help you, which is what we were talking about last time, integrate learnings and then become an evolved version of you. And if we use the video game analogy, like it is, once you learn, you almost, it's like up in a level in a video game, you get new superpowers, right? So, and with that, a lot of the things that we're talking about here in terms of like the basic needs, and people like, you're worried about, all manner of things. The more superpowers you have, the easier it is to ensure not just only that your needs are met, but then you can continue to like influence and help lift others up along the way.
Totally agree. I think two thoughts come to mind. One is flow state. And practically the whole population loves to watch people in flow state, whether they're singers, dancers, athletes, but they aren't taking advantage of flow state in themselves. They're just observers of it. They wonder at it, and they consider that it's not something that is attainable by them. As long as they feel that way, they're right. It's like the pessimism is self-fulfilling. The other thing that I got while you were speaking about any improvements we make in ourselves is an investment that has more lasting effect than any investments we might make externally. Jesus said that also. He talked about money, wealth. You can't bring that with you into the next place. But any changes you make internally will be with you, benefiting you for eternity. So whether you're a Christian or a believer in God or not, kind of makes a difference in this game we're playing at the moment in the year 2025. The game we're playing in the year 2025 is forcing us to make a take a new, fresh look at everything, at every belief we ever had or denied. You know, if you look at the history as traced by, for example, art historians, there was a period called modernism. And when modernism came in, it became culturally hip to be agnostic or atheistic or deistic or move away from the published major religions because they just seemed too superstition, airy-fairy, child's fairy tales. You know, there might be a God, but it wouldn't be this complicated with all of this ritual and all this stuff. It didn't seem right. And then there was postmodernism, where the question was, is there really an objective reality at all? Mm-hmm. Is there such a thing as truth, or do we all have our own subjective truths? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now we've gone beyond postmodernism into probably FUBAR, you know, fouled up beyond all recognition, where given negative social media and 2-year-olds addicted to it, and all of the crushing weight of all of the things we've been talking about, it's so much that nobody believes in anything. And cynicism, popping other people's balloons, has become the major approach to life. It's, you know, denying everything and being skeptical of everything, particularly idealism. Somebody says something idealistic in social media, everyone else jumps on them and says, ooh, I'm cringing. So, but it's time, given the pressure on us in 2025, it's time for us to open our minds completely to all possibilities. It could be that we are all a single consciousness. We're all part of the universe. We are the universe. You know, the most certain thing we have, which is probably wrong, is that we're each separate individuals. No one else can see what's going on inside of us. We can't see what's going on inside of other people. But the problem is that we're reading each other's minds at all times. And it's only the belief that we're not that keeps us from noticing it. Sometimes it's very obvious.
Well, I think how you shared that people love to watch people in a flow state. So whether it's somebody like, you know, up on a stage singing, or it's, you know, they're speaking or playing an instrument. This is not conscious to us, but our bodies are reading like the energy of that other person. And there's a reason that we're in awe of them, right? It's a bit like in nature when something happens and we're in awe. We step back and we watch, and because our bodies are subconsciously, like it's not a conscious thing, we're reading people's energy all the time because, you know, you can't see it, but you can feel it. And I talked even just before we turned the camera on about feeling the energy of a town or a country or, you know, a certain place or a person. We all emit an energy, and whether it's conscious to us or not, our bodies are reading that. So it's, I guess, we are more powerful than we think, and we are constantly reading the world kind of around us and then responding and reacting to that. I just don't think people are aware that that is happening.
Some people have a trust in their own intuition and hunches, particularly in management. You know, CEOs. Jerry Zoltman has done a lot of work interviewing CEOs as well as training them. And he reports that the most effective CEOs are aware of their own powers of intuition and trust them more than anything else. And I've always been a very intuitive person. I believe that my hunches deserve inspection.
That's it, your gut feeling. People have heard the saying, trust your gut. And I am a huge believer in that. And because I think, you know, we're circling around here, I think a lot of our problems are that we try to solve problems or uncertainties with logic. And our intuition and the universe or the world is not always logical, right? So things don't make logical sense. And this is where, again, that default that we started off talking about comes in, right? It's like, okay, well, you shouldn't leave this job because, you're not going to have the pension, or you're not going to have the security. Like, that's your logic, and that's like the fear of what may or may not happen, that default fear. But actually, like, if your intuition or your gut, or however you want to describe it, is telling you, okay, it's time to move on, like, learning to listen to that is super powerful. And like, I know that it feels counterintuitive because it feels very uncomfortable, but our intuition isn't logical. And I think the more that you do that, that could feel scary at first, right? To make a job, like leaving a job. Or maybe if it's just like your intuition's telling you to like turn over the channel, or like, listen to a certain, music or whatever it is. Like, if it feels too much of a jump to like trust your intuition in like what you might deem big life decisions, like, leaving a job or moving town or whatever it is, I think start small, because over that time you will build trust. You'll build trust in like your intuition and your inner knowing. And you'll realize that it isn't always logical and it won't make sense. So I think, we started this talking about uncertainty, and while the world around us will be full of surprises, the one thing that is certain is that you do have this intuition, or you could call it an inner GPS, that is always giving you directions. So one thing is certain, that is within you, and you do have the power to start, one, hear it, and two, start listening to it.
Yeah, particularly if it involves passion work that you're not doing. If you've accepted a secure job and given up the idea of being a novelist, actress, whatever it is, and that's what you really would love to do, you're ruining your life. You're cutting it off from what it's here to do. And economic security, okay, but what's the priority? I mean, are we all just going to settle down and do whatever it takes to survive, but hate what we're doing? That wouldn't be a nice outcome.
I know, but I think that's it. It comes back to the the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Like, people don't think that they can have their dream kind of life because they're so focused on the now. And I think it is okay. You don't need to make that huge leap, but I think it's like starting with the introspection. It's starting with those small steps. It's starting with like setting the rails. If you think of the train track, like, what are those small micro habits that you can do that will then start to build certainty, if not in the world around you, because you don't, that's uncontrollable and it's surprising. You'll build certainty in yourself. If you're able to do those things, you'll build certainty with you. And then, irregardless of what happens round about you, the track's built. Like, you're going to the destination, no matter what might wobble the train.
And I think taking on entertaining negativity is a mistake. Whenever we feel any negativity, we have to say, well, I'm shooting myself in the foot. Do I want to do that? It doesn't make any sense. I better go to the bathroom or something, so I have 5 minutes with no interruptions and figure out what brought me down. Why am I sad? I don't even know why I'm sad. And then figure it out. But figure it out based on your own highest, most complete self. Take into account all of your faculties and studying how to get yourself out of that bad mood. And it may be something really easy, like, I'm not ready to do this particular task at this time. Put that task off. What do I feel like doing right now? Wow, I'd love to do. Well, do it then.
Yeah, that's it. Just like be aware of where you're at the moment, and don't force yourself to do a certain thing, like if that's not what your body or your intuition is saying right now. It's like, okay, I actually just was talking about this, about like seasons of growth as well, and how there's different seasons, and sometimes your body's saying rest, be introspective. Sometimes it's saying, right, take action. This is an action taking stage, plant seeds. Sometimes it's like, okay, receive. And I think that's it. It's being able to tune in to what season you're in, or where your body is at and what it's telling you, and then not beat yourself up about it either. Like, embrace it. So yeah, I'm just conscious that we're probably getting to time, but in terms of where we started today, we started talking about uncertainty and how many of us struggle with that. And I think what you've shared and what we've talked about is that it's fear. It's fear of change and fear of the unknown, but also we have talked a bit about the things that are certain in life, and uncertainty is a certainty. Along with life, death, change, and we talked about how change is very linked. It's linked with our need for attachment. So the uncertainty is kind of the fear of change, which is also linked to the attachment, to not just of people and things, but like the world around us. We're kind of attached to how certain things are. And over the last 20 years or 200 years, like there's so much change happening all the time that we've almost got to the point now that it's not that we're scared to be introspective, but it's almost like a coping mechanism. So if we are to leave viewers with, or listeners with, a message from today, what would you like to share?
To watch their own mind and don't let negativity in. Cure it, find out its source, and do what you have to do so that it goes away as quickly as possible. That there's so many opportunities that you have, both for strengthening yourself and making yourself more capable of the flow state and passion work, and do what you want in life. And the things that you're afraid of losing, when you have time, put time aside to imagine the worst that can happen. Imagine it happening. Watch what you yourself do as you see yourself in your mind's eye rise to the occasion and perform brilliantly, and take it like a man or a woman.
That's it. That just reminds me of a saying, you don't know what you're capable of until you have to do it, right? And I know for me, even reflecting, there's so many things in my life that you don't think that you're capable of doing, but you are. Like, we're all infinitely capable, and you will rise to the challenge. So I think for me, it's yes, things will be uncertain, but the message is really have trust in yourself, because you are capable, and you're more capable than you even realize right now. And not only, trust in yourself, but invest in yourself. And I don't even mean that like monetary wise. I mean time. Like, you are your own biggest asset. And in a world that's uncertain, one thing that's certain is, like, investing in you will pay dividends, and nobody can ever take that away from you. So that would be my message, is invest in yourself. And one thing that is certain is growing yourself. Nobody can take it away.
You've got powers you're not using.
Yeah, the power is in you. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for listening to another fabulous episode all about uncertainty. So we hope you've learned something, and we look forward to coming back next month.
See you then.